Hi everyone, welcome back to the trainings. I'd like to apologize for this one. You won't have a camera feed because I am at home, so I don't have access to the green screen or the screen, and I'd rather not have any distracting elements in my background. So this video concerns scenes. We are going to add different scenes. We're going to switch between them using transitions, and we'll also record some new content. Before you get started, make sure that you have a few different elements or sources that you can add to your scenes. So if you have pictures or videos, or you want to link to a web page, that's fine. Just make sure you have a few things that you can switch between ahead of time, so that you're not stuck finding content to add to your scenes. So once you've had all of that, we can get started. So we're starting here very close to where we left off in the last video. We've got a single scene right here, and I don't have a camera source on right now, but I have my Bubbles video on, and you can have whatever you like. For this video, it doesn't matter what type of content you're going to add to your scenes. It just matters that you have content and that it is different from scene to scene. So I'm going to add another source to this first scene. I'll add an image. Great. I'll add an image called doc. Click OK. And this you remember how to do from the previous video, I hope. And if not, then go back to the previous video and check it out again. So I'll add this. Make this smaller. And we'll pretend that's my face for now. So let's say this is my first scene, and we're going to add some more. A good idea is to name your scenes, or you can number them, but always rename your scene to whatever's appropriate so that you can navigate to it more easily afterwards. So I'm going to right click on the scene, bottom left right here, just right click on the name or the title here, right click, hit rename, and you'll see over here your text becomes editable. It has a little crosshairs there that's flashing. So you can change that to whatever you like except a source name. So if you've named an image doc, for example, see what happens if I call this one doc and I hit enter. It gives me an error message. The name already exists. So just make sure that you're naming your scenes and your sources different things. So I'm going to rename that, and I'll rename this one introduction. And I'll spell it properly. There you go. Hit enter when you're done, and you've named your first scene. To add another scene, the same way as with the sources panel, we're going to hit the plus in the scenes panel to add that. It'll allow you to name your scene. So my next scene is going to be called space, because I love space. You can click OK or hit enter, and you'll see your sources panel suddenly becomes empty. So you'll want to add some sources for this one. And again, you can add whatever you like, whatever you think would make sense for your particular show. It could just be a camera feed. It could be anything. So I'm going to add a media source. I'll add my space video. So I'm going to call it Galaxy, because if I call it space, it won't work, remember. Galaxy, right there. I hit OK, my mouse, browse. I want this to loop actually, so I'll loop it first. Browse. Find my video, which I have here. Great, and I'll hit OK. Then let's drag it to the right size. I want it to fill the whole window. And for my particular needs, this is all I'm going to have in this scene. But this could have as many items as you'd like. So we'll add an additional scene. I'm going to hit the plus sign. Name my scene. I'll name this scene Reflections. Okay. And then I'll add some media to my source. There we go. I'll add an image. Call it Mirror Chess. It'll make sense in a second. Okay. I'll browse for it. I'll find it. Great. And I have this mirror chess video. Mirror test image. Let's just add a fourth scene for good measure. As I said, you could have as many sources, but this video isn't about sources, it's about scenes. So we're going to keep our scenes quite simple. I'm going to add another, and I'm going to call this one Lakeside. I hit OK. I can add a source, image. I'll call this one Lake. Click OK. I'm going to find it, find the lake, and there we are. So we've added that lake. Now there's one little thing that I'd like to show you. So you can do this trick with a camera, with a microphone, whatever you like. Also, as a tip, before I show you this, if you have a microphone that you're using and you're routing through OBS, as I've shown you in the previous video, make sure that it's in whatever scenes you require it to be in. So if you don't add it to a scene and you switch to that scene, it won't automatically add itself. You have to make sure to transfer it over. And to do that, the easiest way is what I'm about to do with this dock. Same thing you can do. You can click on your microphone to do this. You can go right-click and then copy. So you can copy any source. I could do it with a video, with my camera, with a microphone, and then I go to the scene that I'd like. Over here, I'm going to Lakeside. I can right-click again and paste it. So you can paste it as a reference or a duplicate. What that means is that if you duplicate it, for example, what you're doing is just copying what you did before, and then you edit it, and if you want to change anything, then the settings aren't particular to the one individual image in that scene. I'll give you a reference as an example. If you paste it as a reference and you've already set your volume, or with your camera you've already made a few tweaks to the brightness and the contrast and the white balance, if you paste it as a reference, then when you change the original, it'll affect this as well. So you paste as a reference if you want it to be the same as the original, and if you want it to be its own, like a different source, then paste your duplicate. So I'm pasting as a reference for this one. And you see how it's already cropped exactly the same way it was in the other scene. It's the same. That's because I pasted it as a reference and not as a duplicate, because I could have just duplicated the picture, the original file, and this way I referenced it. Great. So now you know how to copy and paste between your scenes. Let's move on to transitions. So you have a panel here. It's the panel beside the audio mixer called Scene Transitions. Right here is your default transition. It's not written that way, but this is what all of your transitions are going to be unless you choose to have them something else individually. So right now, if I transition between anything, it's going to fade in 300 milliseconds. If I go to the left over here to my scenes and I click in a different scene, you'll see it'll fade to it in 300 milliseconds. I can change this, the duration. Let's say I want to change it to 3 seconds, or to 3000 milliseconds. And then if I switch between the scenes, you'll see that becomes a lot slower. That is your default transition. So, and this you can change to anything that you've created. So you'll see there's a drop-down menu. So you click on the drop-down menu. It's going to look similar to mine. I have a left swipe added in there and a spiral, and I think the slide is something new that you may not have as well, because I've added a few of them already. But you should have cut and fade at least here, and then you have an option to add. So you can add any of these. So I'm going to add a swipe. So click on swipe. I'll call it right swipe. Then you click on OK. So this will give you a preview of what your transition is going to look like up here. So you can preview your transition. It'll show you here. You'll see how the speed of the transition is still what's dictated by that default duration that is down there below the scene transition. So if you look back to where we were just now, my mouse over here is at 3000 milliseconds. If I change it back to 300 by hitting the delete key and holding the 0, I can go up here and preview it again. And it goes much, much faster. So this shows what it's going to look like between each scene. Hit OK, and you've created a white swipe. It's added to your list here of usable transitions. You can also add any of these. LumaWipe is the most interesting. It's what I use to create the spiral, which I can show you right here. Same context as the LumaWipe. So let's click on LumaWipe and see what we can find. We don't know what it's going to be. Let's not name it yet because I don't know what we're going to find. We're going to hit OK. Then you can go to the drop-down menu here where it says linear horizontal. Click on that and it gives you a whole lot of options. So if I chose, for example, I could do barn door vertical, preview it, and it opens up like a barn door between scenes. Let's try Sinus 9. That's a strange name. Whoa, that's pretty cool. So if you like any of these, you can hit OK, and then they're added to your list. You can add a whole bunch of these to your list. So basically you want a good set of transitions that you're likely to use. So I've got enough here to show you essentially how this works. So we're going to move on to recording next, and we're going to use something called Studio Mode. But before that, let's make sure we have the correct settings to output our video. So on the right side here, there's a whole slew of soft keys here. You're going to hit Settings. Settings is what you want. Click on that. And there are two options, two tabs that we're going to look at on the left here. First, we're going to look at Output. So click on Output. Then you get to choose where you'd like to record your video. I've got it here. I've been doing some videos, some training videos. So I've got a different recording path than you may have, but you can set it to anything you'd like in your computer. You're also going to be able to choose the recording quality. So there are a few different choices. If you click on the drop-down menu, there's same as stream. So if you're streaming to Facebook, you could also record using OBS. So you can stream and record your stream at the same time. You can increase the quality of the recording and keep the quality the same for the stream. So Facebook only records in 720p, but if you wanted to, you could set your canvas to be quite large and then choose a higher quality video setting and then make a higher quality recording than is being streamed. But to use the least amount of information in your computer as possible, you would choose same as stream and it'll look the same as what you've done for your stream. It's also great to use same as stream if you're testing what your video is going to look like before you ever do your show. So you actually get to see what other people are going to see in your live stream. So there's high quality, indistinguishable, and lossless. I have never needed lossless. It is, as they say, a tremendously large file size. It's also a tremendous load on your computer. So if you don't have a video editing computer, then I don't recommend using lossless quality. It is a bit of a waste because there's very few applications where you can actually send the files that size and use them. English indistinguishable quality is great if you've already got your canvas set at 1080p. It's great videos. It's what I've used to do some of these training videos myself. Indistinguishable is great. High quality is still a fantastic option, and same as stream is really for testing your stream or for not being too taxing on your computer. There are a few different recording format options, so that these you may or may not be familiar with. There are a few of these. I haven't used them all, but the reason I use MKV is because you can pause the stream at any time. And also if for some reason your computer crashes, it's recording kind of in a live way. So if your computer crashes, you won't lose what you've done so far. If you choose anything else, for example, .move right here, unrecoverable if the file cannot be finalized. So you'll have that with a few different options, MP4 and move. FLV I haven't used, it's a flash video, but I would like to keep it on MKV because it's compatible with a lot of different hardware and software, and I haven't had a problem with it yet. So my recommendation, if you don't want to play around with it, is to keep it in MKV. The encoder here, mine is set as hardware because I have a graphically intensive computer. Essentially what this means is that it uses your graphics card instead of your CPU for creating the videos. I've set mine this way because I have a particularly strong graphics card. You may not have it, so leave it if you don't know whether your computer can do it. Just leave it as software x64. Great. And then you have your streaming options, which I wouldn't touch unless you want to switch to hardware. Otherwise, it's fine for our usage. If you'd like to look more into it, there are a lot of tutorials online about how to set your video bitrate and audio bitrate based on your needs, but this won't be covered in this video. We're going to click on the Video tab. So I've got my base canvas resolution and output resolution at 1920 by 1080. Yours is likely at 720, so 1280 by 720, because that's what I've told you to do for streaming to Facebook. Because I want to create a great high quality recording, mine says 920 by 1080. You can change yours if you'd like. It does give you a better quality video file, but it does mean that if you're streaming to Facebook at the same time, your feed will end up being scaled down. So you got that, and keep your FPS at 30 is very reasonable. It's what most things are recorded at, and that is what your video tab is for. So we're going to apply there. Okay. So we've got our video settings set up. We've got a few scenes we can transition from, and we've got some scene transitions we can transition through. So let's go into studio mode. So we're going to click on studio mode. Right here on the left, on the right, there is a soft key, studio mode, right over here. Click on that. And it gives you a left panel and a right panel. Your left panel is called your preview monitor. And the program panel on the right will display whatever you are either recording or streaming. If you were streaming, it's the same interface that shows up. It's called studio mode, but when you click on streaming for your next video with Jared, this is going to be really handy because it's exactly the same interface. So you've got, in the middle, we've got transitions. So transition will do whatever your default transition is set to. So right now, my default transition is set to that Luma wipe we created. So if I hit transition, actually it shouldn't do anything because the program and the loaded cue are the same. So if I were to load up my second cue, hit transition, then it would transition using whatever transition is your default down here in scene transitions. Great. Now you'll notice that the videos are showing up on the active screen, but not on our preview monitor. That's because it wants to be able to trigger them at the beginning every time you load them up. You start them in the scene. So right here, it's not wasting that computation, that processing power at all, because it's saving that for your stream. So if you change your default transition to anything, if I would change it to spiral, for example, it shows a different scene, transitioned, using the transition button in the middle, then it uses that default right over there. You also have quick transitions. So you can add or remove quick transitions. By default, it will have a fade to black here, and I think it has a cut as well, but I've changed it myself. So my apologies for not showing you exactly the same thing as you'll be on your screen, but there'll be a few here by default, and you can edit them and remove them as you'd like. So you can add transitions. So I'll add that. I can add a spiral, for example, and then it adds it to my quick transition list. So I can click on spiral here, and then instead of using the default transition, it'll use whichever buttons I'm using in the middle here. And you'll notice that it gives you different time options because you can set these times individually. For your default, it makes your time the same whatever you change to, your default time doesn't change unless you change it manually down here on the bottom under scene transitions. Great. So if you hit this drop-down menu on any of your quick transitions, you can switch the timing on them as well. So I can switch my fade time here to 500 milliseconds, click anywhere otherwise, and then it changes to 500 milliseconds. I can click on that, and that's a 500 millisecond fade, and you can make that anything. Okay, so let's go to our first scene. So I'm going to click on Introduction, I'm going to transition into it, and that's the first scene that we've started to. So if you wanted to load between your next scenes, you go to the bottom left where it says Scenes, and you can click on any of your next scene, any other scene, and it loads it up so that it's ready to go on. It's kind of like in theater, putting an actor in the wings, or putting a cue on standby if you're a technician. So right now, if I clicked on space, for example, I've got space on standby, ready to go, and I can use the default transition, which at this point would be spiral. So transitions up here, default would be spiral, and then, or I can use any of these quick transitions. So I can use a quick transition instead, and I can do fade. And then fade to black obviously fades to black, so it doesn't actually bring you to a new slide, it just fades to black. So if you somehow have mucked something up and you want just to fade to black, your screen will fade to black and your sources will remain active. So in terms of your microphone, you'll still be able to talk if you fade to black. And that's also an option. The other thing that you can do with these transitions is you can override any of them. So say you don't want to use this middle transition bit, because it can be a little tricky if you're doing a live show to think about what you want next, and that makes absolute sense. If you're always going to transition between two scenes in exactly the same way, or you're always going to transition, more importantly, into a scene in the same way, what you end up doing is overriding the transition for that scene. So on the left here, on bottom left where it says Scenes, I can click on Reflections, for example, right click, go to Transition Override, and then choose any of these. So I can transition override and make it so that regardless of what I choose in terms of transition, it'll always do it the same way. So I'm going to do spiral. So its transition in Reflections will always be spiral. Then I can right click, do the transition override, and change the speed on it. So I can make it a 3000 millisecond spiral. So if I transition to it, even though my default transition says spiral 300 milliseconds, it's actually spiral 3000 milliseconds because of that transition override right here. I said 3000 milliseconds. Or I can take that off by hitting none. And then when I transition back to it, I'm going to transition. Once I transition, it's back to the 300 milliseconds because that's the default transition. Great. So those are transitions. You won't get used to them immediately. That is fine. That is fine. It's going to take some time for you to play around with it. So my advice to you is to do a recording of your show. Play with the transitions. Get yourself really familiar with it before you start a live show streaming. So you can rewatch the stream, see how your actions affected the stream. So what we're going to do now is start our first recording. So for me, I want to start and have my the live scene here be my first scene, for example. So I'm going to click on transition, and now my first scene is the active scene. I can recognize that it's the first scene. Now, I can also, instead, I could fade to black. And then that would mean that when it starts, I can transition into that first thing. So it's nice, you can start the stream, they see nothing, and then hit the transition, and then suddenly start. So we can do it that way. So I'll hit fade to black, and then we can start recording. So you're going to click on Start Recording right over here, which is the soft panels on the right. Start Recording. Click on Start Recording. You'll see here on the bottom, there's a red icon that says Rec and shows you how long you've been recording from. It also shows you your CPU usage. So if you notice this is really high, for example, you might be using a too high setting for your computer. Like the setting, it might be too taxing for your computer. So it's a good gauge right here. And 30 FPS is what you want to be recording at. But if you see that starting to drop, that means that your computer can't quite handle what you're doing. Great. So we've got it set up. Right now what people are seeing, it's a black screen. If I were to hit, let's say, left swipe 4,000 milliseconds, I'd go into my introduction scene right now. So I'll hit left swipe right over there, and that's the introduction scene that's live. If that scene is started, now we're still recording, and I want, instead of going to space, for example, I can go directly to my reflection slide. I can choose a transition. Here, I'll choose the spiral. Oh, it's already 3,000 milliseconds. I'll switch that on the fly here. 3,000. There we go, and I'll spiral slowly into my reflections. You'll notice that when you've gone to a scene, it automatically loads up the previous scene. So if you notice in scenes down here at the bottom left, even though I clicked on reflections and I put it up here and transitioned to it, introduction gets selected next. It'll always select whatever you had that was last active. So if I hit transition, I'm going into the previous scene. So that's a bit of a Control Z or an undo if you guys are computer people. So if you transition to a scene, you said, "Oh no, I shouldn't have transitioned to that scene." You can go back to the previous scene really fast. Or some shows are more of like a home-based scene where you have one scene that you're always returning to, and this allows a really easy return to that scene during your show. Great. Oh, and one last little trick. This one I haven't used it myself in any practical use, but this slider is also a way to override the timing. So there's a slider underneath your transition, and you can slide at any point to override the timing between scenes. And anytime you let go of that grab, it considers it done. So I'm clicking on it, dragging on it, and I'm still holding on to it, and I can go back and forth. But as soon as you let go of your mouse, it transitions to the next scene. So it allows you to choose the timing of that transition, which, hey, you might want to use it. I don't see any practical effect for it, but it's a tool that you can use. Great, and now I'm going to stop my recording. Great, and I've made a recording. Now to find your recording, you just go back into the folder that you chose when you went into Settings, Output. This folder is where you're going to find your recording, and the recording is labeled with the date and time that you started recording. That's how you find it, and you should be able to look at it again. So it's a great practice to record your live show before you actually bring it live, to work out the kinks, see what you're actually going to look like, change a few things, get a little rehearsal in there, or create a recording of your show that you can publish without any interruptions that may pop up during the stream. So I'd like to thank you very much for watching this video. Our next video is going to be with Jared, and he's going to show you how to connect OBS to Facebook Live and do a live stream. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in our last video after Jared. It's a little bonus video on how to connect a green screen.